Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. Over the last few months, we've been in a series called Why Does My Healing Matter? And as we come to the end today, I found myself sitting with that question in a very different way than when we first began. What started as a theme for a few conversations has, for me, become something so much more personal. These interviews haven't just been recordings. They've been mirrors. They've been gentle and sometimes confronting invitations in my own journey. Sitting across from each of our guests and hearing them tell the truth about their own healing journeys has been powerful in a way I didn't fully anticipate. Each person answered that central question differently. Some spoke about healing in terms of freedom. Others described it as honesty. Some framed it as coming home to themselves and to God. But beneath all of their stories was a shared thread. At some point, the way they had learned to operate in the world stopped working. And that has stayed with me. Most of us learn very early on who we need to be in order to survive. We learn which emotions are welcome and which ones are too much. We learn what earns approval and what risks rejection. And then we construct personas. Masks, really. The word persona actually comes from the Greek word for a stage mask. These are roles we play so that life goes well, so that we're validated, and so that we're loved. The achiever, the peacemaker, the strong one, the spiritual one, the easygoing one, the helper, the one who doesn't need anything. And for a while, those masks work. They help us navigate our families, our churches, our jobs, and our relationships. They help us secure belonging, they give us identity, and they keep us safe. But then somewhere, often between our mid-20s and mid-50s, though it can happen at any point, the soul initiates a crisis, and something begins to crack. The very strategies that once protected us start to feel constricting. The provisional identities we built, those ways of operating that once felt necessary, no longer fit. For some, that crisis looks like addiction. For others, it's the collapse of a relationship, infidelity, burnout, anxiety, or depression. Or even the sudden sense that the life you built doesn't actually feel like yours. Whatever form it takes, it has a way of breaking us open. And in that moment, it can feel excruciating. Like everything is falling apart. But what I've heard again and again in this series is that these moments of rupture are not just endings. They're invitations. Invitations into a deeper kind of healing work. Invitations to examine the masks we wear and ask, who am I beneath the roles? What have I been protecting? What have I been avoiding? And what is my nervous system still bracing against? All four of our guests described their own version of this unraveling. They named the crisis that forced them to confront the gap between who they were performing as and who they actually were. And I think that's why these conversations have resonated so deeply, not just with me, but with so many of you. I've heard from listeners who have emailed or messaged or stopped me to essentially say, I saw myself in that story. That's what has made this series so meaningful for me. It hasn't stayed contained within these episodes. It's moved into real lives, into mine and yours. So today, as we wrap up this series, I want to take a step back and return to the question we've been exploring all along. Why does my healing matter? I want to weave it all together today and offer some personal reflections on what I've been learning through these conversations about the courageous work of healing. Because if this series has shown us anything, it's that healing is never just about feeling better. It's about becoming whole. And that matters not just for you, but for every relationship, space, and story your life touches. As I've been reflecting on this, I keep coming back to something I heard recently that put language to what we've been circling around all season. I was listening to a therapist who defined healing as moving from survival to choice. From survival to choice. Healing isn't about becoming a completely different person. It's not about erasing our past or eliminating every trigger or never feeling activated again. It's about gaining options. It's about no longer being hijacked by old wiring. Pete Sharp described this so beautifully last week when he said that healing frees us to have a broader range of responses. He talked about feeling less stuck, like there were more tools in the toolbox. The language of less stuck feels so important because when we're operating purely out of survival, our responses are narrow and predictable. If someone raises their voice, we shut down. If we feel criticized, we get defensive. If we anticipate rejection, we perform. The nervous system has already decided what's happening and how we need to respond before our conscious mind even catches up. That's why I often tell my clients, awareness brings choice. When we are unaware, our actions are automatic. We're running old scripts and reacting from the body memory of past experiences. But when we notice, oh, my chest just tightened, or I'm feeling small right now, or I'm bracing, something shifts. There's this tiny bit of space between stimulus and response. And that space, however small, is sacred. Because in that space, choice becomes possible. Choice to pause. Choice to say, I'm feeling defensive. Can we slow down? Choice to stay present instead of disappearing. Choice to ask for clarification instead of assuming the worst. Choice to soften instead of escalate. That's the movement from survival to choice. And here's the part that can feel counterintuitive. Healing doesn't happen by avoiding the very things that activate us. It happens through them. The charge around the pain lessens through lived, embodied experience. Here's the thing, we actually need moments in our relationships where something in us lights up, where we feel misunderstood, ignored, challenged, criticized, or dismissed. Those moments are not interruptions to healing. They are the pathway. If we never encounter a trigger, if we never risk activation, we might temporarily feel calm, but we're not necessarily integrating anything. We might just be organizing our lives around avoidance. And that avoidance can look a lot like peace on the surface. I love how Emily P. Freeman describes this. She says that there is a difference between the peace that comes from doing the deeply right thing and the relief that comes from avoiding discomfort. That distinction is so important. Relief says, I got out of that conversation. I dodged that vulnerability. I kept the mask on. Peace says, I stayed. I told the truth. I tolerated discomfort. I chose differently. When we encounter a trigger and something different happens, when the outcome is not what our nervous systems predicted, our brains begin to update. For example, if your body expects rejection and instead you experience understanding, If you anticipate abandonment and instead someone stays, if you assume criticism and instead you're met with curiosity, your nervous system registers it. Oh, it can be different. And that small, almost imperceptible shift is where healing begins. In those micro moments where survival loosens its grip just enough to make room for choice. So as we wrap up today, I want to bring this full circle back to what's actually happening in your brain when you feel activated, and how this connects to everything we've been saying about moving from survival to choice. One framework that's been especially helpful for me is what Dr. Jim Wilder calls enemy mode. Enemy mode is that survival-based brain state. It's what happens when your nervous system perceives relational threat. The amygdala fires, stress hormones move through your body, and the parts of your brain responsible for empathy, curiosity, and flexible thinking actually go offline. In that state, the person in front of you doesn't register as a complex human being. They actually register as a problem to solve, a threat to manage, or an obstacle to overcome. That's why enemy mode feels so convincing. It can show up as anger, withdrawal, control, criticism, or total shutdown. It can even feel strong and justified, but it's reactive power, not relational strength. It's your brain reaching for strategies that once kept you safe. And almost always, it's connected to old pain. When something in the present brushes up against an earlier wound, like being overlooked, misunderstood, or abandoned, the brain reacts as if the past is happening again. Enemy mode says, protect yourself the way you learned back then. Healing doesn't mean you never enter that state. It means you begin to recognize it. Oh, I'm activated. I'm bracing. I'm seeing this person as an enemy right now. That awareness is the interruption. It's the sacred space we've been talking about, that space where survival loosens just enough for choice to emerge. Wilder contrasts enemy mode with what he calls relational mode. In relational mode, empathy stays online. You can feel hurt and still see the other person as a human. You can stay connected even in conflict. You can respond from intention rather than instinct. And here's what's striking. The strongest builder of relational mode isn't willpower. It's joy. Drawing from attachment neuroscience, particularly the work of Alan Shore, we know that the right hemisphere of the brain, the part most responsible for emotional attunement and connection, develops through relationship. And the foundational emotion that wires it is joy. Not joy as excitement, but joy as I am glad to be with you. When someone's face softens as they look at you, when they stay present in your mess, when they delight in you rather than criticize or evaluate you, those moments literally strengthen relational circuits in the brain. On a neurological level, joy builds identity, increases regulation, expands empathy, and quiets fear. Which means joy isn't peripheral to healing. It's central to it. Every time someone is genuinely glad to be with you in a moment that once triggered shame or defensiveness, this moment becomes a disconfirming experience where your nervous system learns connection is safe here. And every time you become that kind of presence for someone else, steady, warm, and grounded, you help quiet enemy mode for them. And this is why all of this matters. Because most of life isn't lived in big, dramatic breakthroughs. It's lived in ordinary moments of tension, misunderstandings, disappointments, hard conversations, and long days. The question underneath all of those moments is this: will I move towards survival or towards connection? Maybe healing is just this: choosing in those small moments to stay present in your body, to stay curious instead of certain, to stay connected instead of cutting off. Not perfectly and not every time, but enough that fear and self-protection are no longer making all of your decisions. Enough that connection becomes more familiar than defense. And enough that over time, you recognize yourself as someone who can remain present without losing yourself. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.